So I am very excited to chat with Louise Digby as we will be talking about some of the different factors that can make it difficult to lose weight, and there definitely are a lot of a lot of different factors. So very excited to have this conversation. Let me go ahead and dive into Louise's bio here. So Louise Digby is a registered nutritional therapist, women's weight loss expert, and founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. Her clients come to her after struggling to lose weight despite eating well and working hard to burn the fat. Louise transforms her clients' health and well being by identifying and addressing each individual's unique needs and imbalances so that they can lose weight, optimize their health, and rediscover their sparkle without restrictive dieting or the need for superhuman willpower. And thank you for joining us, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you about some of the different things that could make it a struggle to lose weight. A lot of people, as we both know, just focus on diet and exercise, and we'll definitely talk about some of that. But many times it goes beyond just cleaning up your dieting and beyond exercise. But before we do that, if we could get a little bit more of your background. So, how did you start focusing on helping, other women lose weight?
Well, I graduated in nutrition back in 2012. And when I first started, I was seeing everyone and anyone, whatever their problem or whatever their health goal, whether it was IBS or depression or eczema, you name it. And what I found is that pretty much everyone that I worked with also wanted to lose weight as like a side goal. And I also had people come to me just for weight loss, not for any other issues or conditions. But what was interesting was that the people who were focusing more on their health and addressing their underlying imbalances actually got way better results when it came to the weight loss side of things than the people who were just focusing on their weight and who were doing more portion control and trying to just come up with creative ways to eat less and exercise more. So I also noticed that there was a particular group of people, women in their 40s and 50s, who were super disciplined and trying really, really hard to keep in shape and lose the weight, but really not seeing very much progress at all. So I ended up gravitating towards that particular area because it was a bit of a conundrum, and it was really frustrating to see these women trying so hard and not really getting anywhere. So that kind of helped me to formulate my approach of looking deeper than just how much someone's eating and how much they're exercising, and actually uncovering the underlying imbalances that affect metabolism and hormones and cause weight to become stubborn, particularly around that time of perimenopause and menopause.
All right. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you were some of the biggest mistakes women make when trying to lose weight, and you kind of already touched upon a few of them. Just trying to restrict calories, trying to just exercise, maybe overtrain even. Are there any other common mistakes that women make when trying to shed pounds?
Yeah, I think what goes hand in hand with cutting calories and cutting things out is ignoring what your body actually needs. So, your typical diet approach just looks at, what do I need to avoid? What do I need to cut out? What are the bad foods? And instead, I find it's a much more helpful approach and a much more positive experience to focus on what your body actually needs to thrive and to function properly. Focus on what we need to add into the diet rather than what we need to take out, which might mean looking at, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough carbs? Because so often many of us go straight to cutting out the carbs, but they have a function, they have a place, and taking them too low in some circumstances could actually make you gain weight. Making sure you have enough fat and that you're meeting your nutrient requirements are, all key things that we want to make sure we've got in place so that our body is able to repair and stay in balance. And then you also mentioned overtraining, and this is a really key point, because most of the women that come to me are, like I say, trying really hard to lose the weight. And sometimes that looks like being in the gym every day, doing spin classes constantly, doing really long runs or lots of high intensity cardio. But that can actually drive up your cortisol levels or your stress hormones, which can lead to you storing more fat around your middle. So sometimes we actually need to scale back the exercise a little bit and essentially take a much more gentle and nurturing approach to weight loss rather than the punishing deprivation approach that we've been taught.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to the carbohydrates because you mentioned that some people restrict carbohydrates, too much, and obviously ketogenic diet is a proponent of doing that. And some people do okay with keto. I mean, not to say it never loses weight. I
Mm.
mean, not to say that people never lose weight when following a ketogenic diet, but it's not a perfect fit for everyone. So what do you look at? I definitely want to talk about protein as well, but when it comes to carbohydrates, then does it depend on the person? Or for most of the people who are seeing you, do you recommend to not go below a certain amount when it comes to grams of carbohydrates?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the person. And particularly if someone has a thyroid issue or if they're very highly stressed, then it's probably not a great idea to take carbs too low. If they're very active, it's helpful to have at least some carbs in your diet. As to what that specific amount is for each person, it will vary, but I think avoiding taking it below sort of 70, 50 grams, sorry, the other way around, 50 to 70 grams per day, um, is best for most of the women that I'm working with. I just find taking carbs too low is something that halts their progress. But like you've said, some people do quite well on the ketogenic diet. But I have a lot of women come to me who have done well on the ketogenic diet, and then the progress has stopped and the weight has become ultra stubborn. So just because you're getting results initially doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right approach for you in the long term. But some people have good success with taking a hybrid approach where they switch between doing keto for a week and then doing more of a low GL approach for a few weeks and then back into keto. So that can work better, but more so if your thyroid is functioning okay.
Okay. Yeah. And I agree with you with keto. Even if keto is working, it's not, in my opinion, really a long-term solution. Like you don't want to stay on keto for
Mm.
like really long term. It's not a permanent diet. So you're right. Some people might have success losing weight, but then after a while, they might plateau. Again, even if it's working, there's concerns about the effects on the gut microbiome if you're following ketogenic diet for quite a long time. So yeah, I
Mm.
appreciate you bringing that up. And then you mentioned thyroid. So if someone has a thyroid issue, you want to be careful about doing ketogenic diet. Anything else? I know you had some other episodes on other podcasts where you spoke about thyroid and weight gain. So what relationship have you seen between those with thyroid conditions and the struggles they have with losing weight?
So, your thyroid is basically the master controller of your metabolism. It controls the speed of pretty much everything that's going on in your body. So, if your thyroid is under functioning or if it's suboptimal, then everything's going to slow down, including your fat burning and energy production. Um, and what I so often find is that a lot of people, particularly women, have been to their doctors, had their thyroids tested, and been told that it's absolutely normal, don't need to worry about that. But there's a few problems with that because the tests that are typically done at the doctors, particularly here in the UK, and I think it's probably the same where you are, they're very basic and they really just look at TSH, which is the signal that your brain sends to your thyroid to tell it how hard to work. And that's not actually testing the output of the hormones from your thyroid. Um, occasionally, if you're lucky, you might get your T4 tested as well, which is your main thyroid hormone. But again, it's still not enough information for us to see whether the thyroid is working properly. There's other hormones and factors that can be tested. So it's not a full picture, but also the ranges that your doctors are looking at for your TSH and your T4 are very wide. And in terms of what is considered to be optimal, it's a much narrower range that we should be looking at. So very often people are coming to me with their thyroid kind of being ruled out, but actually their thyroid isn't optimal. And when we do a more in-depth test, we see that there's other factors like the T3 or the antibodies that are not where they should be. And that can have an impact on your metabolism and how your body burns and stores fats.
Yeah, definitely agree about the optimal ranges, which you're right, most doctors aren't paying attention to. And yeah, definitely the same here with a lot of doctors just looking at TSH, some doing the TSH and the total T4 or free T4, but a lot of doctors still don't do the T3. And some will do antibodies. Usually they'll do antibodies maybe one time and won't do anything, like won't monitor them at all. But as we both know, the treatment is usually the same regardless, whether at least those with Hashimoto's, whether or not they have antibodies, it's usually thyroid hormone replacements if the TSH is outside of their lab reference range. So most autoimmune condition, or I'm sorry, most thyroid conditions are autoimmune. So the next question I have is when it comes to inflammation, because they typically are associated with inflammation, both not only Hashimoto's, but Graves' disease, other autoimmune conditions. So does inflammation play a role when it comes to struggles with losing weight?
Definitely. Yeah, it plays a massive role. And, inflammation is it's a term that we often hear bandied about and never really gets discussed in any real detail. But most problems, whether it's a symptom or a condition, there's usually, it's usually underpinned by inflammation in some way or driven by inflammation in some way. And, it's the same for stubborn weight. And, one of the issues of inflammation is that it can drive insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is something that can basically make it very difficult for us to get into fat burning mode. So, inflammation can be disruptive that way. It can also be very disruptive to your hormones. And there's many different ways in which our hormones are involved in how we burn and store fat. So yeah, inflammation is definitely a massive factor for many of the people that I work with.
Yeah, when you say hormones, are you talking about specifically the sex hormones, like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone?
I'm really talking about most hormones. So yes, the sex hormones, also your thyroid hormones, also your blood sugar hormones like insulin and glucagon, your hunger hormones, and even your brain chemicals. So, they're all involved in one way or another when it comes to your appetite, cravings, fat burning, speed of your metabolism, and inflammation can be disruptive to all of them.
Yeah. So you mentioned, again, we spoke a little bit about thyroid. You earlier, I believe you mentioned cortisol, like when talk about overtraining, and obviously there's emotional stressors that could affect cortisol, make it difficult to lose weight. And then, yeah, you spoke about insulin resistance and the hunger hormone, like leptin resistance. So how about the sex hormones? How can the sex hormones then influence weight gain?
So, when it comes to the sex hormones, the common problem that there can be many different ways in which they're imbalanced, but the really common issue that we see, particularly in women, is that as they become perimenopausal, often estrogen levels can become dominant. So basically, we can have too much estrogen in relation to progesterone. And when we have high estrogen levels, that can be disruptive because it can, again, interfere with the way that insulin works. It can interfere with our histamine levels, and histamine is involved in our appetite and, again, inflammation. So that's one of the key ways in which it can drive weight gain. And then, progesterone is a very calming hormone. And as that declines, as we go through that perimenopausal shift, or if we're very stressed, our progesterone levels can be a little bit suppressed and a bit low. And then that can make us more anxious, and that can feed into things like comfort eating and those types of not so helpful eating patterns. So some of it is kind of directly related to the way that our body burns fat, and some of it is more psychological.
All right. Do they do in the UK? Do you have access to the Dutch test where they look also at the metabolism of estrogen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's because that also some people might have normal estrogen levels, but problems with the metabolism of estrogen, which could also be a factor, which I know
Yeah.
already know. So
Yeah, and it's that's something that we see quite a lot. A lot of people would come to us with a test from their doctors, a blood test that says that all their sex hormones are as they should be. But again, when you do a more detailed test that looks more at the tissue levels of your hormones and how you're metabolizing them, then there's a lot more information there to work with. And you mentioning the Dutch test, which reminds me that I haven't spoken about testosterone, which is absolutely key as well. And testosterone is a hormone that we tend to think about when we're talking about men, but it's very key for women as well. And again, it tends to decline over time, particularly during perimenopause and menopause. And testosterone is so important for us to maintain our muscle mass, and muscle is so important for helping us to maintain a healthy weight because it's metabolically active. So the less muscle you have, the fewer calories you burn, whether you're exercising or whether you're resting. So the drop off in testosterone can be a big issue as well.
all right. Well, thanks for sharing that. And sticking on the topic of muscle mass, so protein, we spoke about the carbs, getting adequate protein also important. What do you typically recommend as far as protein intake per day?
Yeah, it does again depend on the individual, but generally somewhere between 20 to 30 grams per meal of protein per day is probably good for most people. Um, and to clarify that, sometimes when I say 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, some people think that means 20 grams of chicken or 20 grams of steak, but I mean 20 grams of protein, which might mean a 100-gram chicken breast or something like that. So it's not about the total amount of the food, it's about the protein content within that.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that as well. Gut microbiome. So, what role does the gut microbiome play when it comes to losing weight, trying to have a healthy weight?
The gut plays an absolutely massive role in weight management. It's involved in quite a few different ways. So your gut is very closely linked to your immune system. The vast majority of our immune system is really in our gut, and your immune system is very much in control of inflammation in your body. So if your gut isn't balanced and happy, the likelihood is that you're probably not going to be having a healthy immune response, and you're going to be more prone to chronic inflammation. So controlling or making sure that your gut is happy and healthy is important for supporting a healthy inflammation level in your body. And then the gut microbiome, it can very easily become imbalanced with too many bacteria that are not helpful and not enough beneficial bacteria. And when the gut microbiome becomes imbalanced, we can have an increased production of toxins. Those toxins can be absorbed into our system, and then our body has to eliminate them. Those toxins can be damaging and can drive inflammation, but also that extra burden on your liver having to get rid of those toxins can also drive weight gain, because your body has a really clever way of helping to manage a high toxic load if your liver isn't detoxing as efficiently as it should be. And one of the ways in which our body protects ourselves from that high toxic load is to store toxins away in fat. So your body may actually slow down fat burning or even upregulate fat storage as a defense mechanism to protect yourself from those toxins. So that's one kind of very indirect way that the gut is quite linked to fat burning. And then there's the hormones as well. So when we've used our hormones, we detox them. So we process them via the liver, and then we eliminate them via the digestive tract. And if there are imbalances in the gut, some of these hormones can actually be reactivated and reabsorbed into circulation, which contributes to imbalances in your hormones. So the gut is very, very important, for those physiological reasons. And then, there's also a very strong link between the gut and the brain. And if, again, your gut isn't balanced, if it's not happy, then that can impact your mood. It can impact your cravings. It can impact your energy levels. And, when we're trying to eat well and maintain healthy habits, having a low mood, having low energy are things that are not helpful for that consistency. So it also has an impact on the brain, which can, be a massive barrier.
How about refined sugars? So what impact does refined sugars have on the body, including the gut?
Yeah, refined sugar has a massive impact on the body. Starting with the gut, it can feed the less beneficial bacteria and yeasts in the gut, and that can lead them to overgrow and become, a source of inflammation and toxins and digestive issues. Sugar is definitely not the friend of your gut. Sugar can also, if we have too much of it in the diet, then it can drive sugar spikes in your blood, which, it's normal for your blood sugars to go up and down a little bit, but we don't want to be having massive peaks and troughs in those blood sugar levels. When we have big peaks in our blood sugar levels, that can drive up our insulin levels, which, again, to explain it in a overly simplified way, insulin is essentially a fat storage hormone. So if we have insulin being released a lot and it's at quite high levels in the blood, then that's something that's going to drive fat storage and make it very difficult for you to get into fat burning mode. So too many blood sugar spikes can be a problem for that reason. But also after a blood sugar spike, there is usually a blood sugar crash. And when our blood sugars crash or dip down too low, that's a time when we're going to be craving sugar, we're going to be craving carbs, and it's going to be very, very difficult to use willpower to resist those cravings, because what your body needs to restore the balance of your blood sugars is sugar or carbs. So the cravings are pretty intense and very difficult to ignore. But also at that time, you might be feeling tired, you might be struggling to concentrate, you might be feeling irritable or hangry. So it's kind of the blood sugar ups and downs are a bit of a recipe for weight gain.
So what do you do then? Like if a patient client comes to see you and they have these blood sugar imbalances, maybe they have insulin resistance and they have these sugar cravings. On top of that, maybe they even have yeast overgrowth, candida overgrowth. So because you just said it yourself, it's not always easy just to say, okay, use willpower and just cut out the sugar. Obviously, we want people to do that, and you're going to make dietary changes. But do you have people do that gradually? Do you recommend any supplementation to help with that? Like, what's your approach when someone comes in, or if you're working remotely with someone and they have these strong sugar cravings?
I think going back to what I was saying at the beginning in terms of focusing on adding stuff in rather than cutting stuff out. And the first thing that I'd want to add in is protein, making sure that someone is getting enough protein throughout the day, but particularly at breakfast. Because if we can have a good intake of protein for our first meal of the day, ideally with some fat and some fiber, that is going to be very satisfying and satiating. It's going to keep you full up for hours, and it's going to fill you up without causing an increase in your blood sugars too dramatically, which means you're not going to have the blood sugar crash later on. And that means that later on in the day, you're not going to have the cravings and that compulsion to eat sugary things or carby things to pick up your blood sugars and your energy levels. So something as simple as getting protein into breakfast can make it so much easier to make better food choices without you even needing to talk about cutting out sugar or cutting out kind of quote unquote bad foods. So that's the first thing that I would think about. And then, there's also other things that impact your blood sugars. Not for everyone, but caffeine can be a driver of raised blood sugars. So if you're having a lot of caffeine in the morning and then you're noticing a slump in the afternoon where you're reaching for sugars or that sort of thing, then it could be driven by the caffeine wearing off in the afternoon and your energy levels plummeting because of that. And then I'd also be thinking about sleep. If someone's not sleeping properly, then their appetite's going to be bigger. They're going to be more likely to crave carbier, sugary foods. So it's not all about what you eat. It's also about making sure that you're getting enough rest and you're getting good quality sleep, and that you're also taking steps to manage stress, because stress is a massive driver of cravings and wanting more sugary foods. And sometimes it can be a driver for because of comfort eating and wanting to self-soothe with those foods and distract yourself from what you're feeling and that sort of thing. If someone has more of a gut bacterial issue or a yeast issue that's driving their cravings, I'd still start with all those things that I've just mentioned, but they might need a more targeted approach, which is focused on rebalancing the gut bacteria. And, that can involve lots of different things with my clients. I run tests so that we can identify what those imbalances specifically are. But essentially, we want to get them to the point where they've got a healthy level of beneficial bacteria and not too much of the other types of bacteria and yeasts, and that their gut lining is nice and healthy, and that they're ultimately digesting their food properly.
Okay, so that makes sense. So start with adding more things, making sure they're getting sufficient protein, healthy fats, fiber, work on sleep, stress management, and then in some cases, maybe dig deeper with some of the testing to see actually what's going on in the gut microbiome. And you mentioned histamine earlier, and you mentioned in relation to estrogen. So I believe estrogen can inhibit that DAO enzyme, which could, make histamine a factor, histamine intolerance, or at least can be a contributing factor. And there could be other factors as well that can cause a histamine intolerance. How common do you see that in your patients as far as problems with histamine?
It's definitely not a factor for everyone, but it's fairly common. We see it fairly often. I think it's something that becomes more common in the age group that I work with, so women in their 40s and 50s, because of the estrogen levels increasing in the early stages of perimenopause. So it is something that we see, and we do have to be aware of. And the interesting thing about histamine intolerance is that it can cause quite a wide range of different symptoms. So, it's not always easy to identify it immediately, but it is something that we're always looking out for.
So next, I want to talk with you a little bit about intermittent fasting, because a lot of people are doing intermittent fasting these days, different ways. Some just do a 16/8 fast, some incorporate 24-hour fast. So what thoughts do you have as far as using intermittent fasting as a potential tool for losing weight?
I think it can definitely be, I think tool is the right word. I think it's definitely a tool that is suitable for some people, but not for everyone. There's definitely loads of good research on it, in terms of not only helping with weight loss, but also helping with all sorts of other things like, the health of your brain, lowering inflammation, and all sorts of things, gut microbiome. But again, particularly with the age group that I work with, and them being women, it's something that I'm very cautious around, because fasting can exacerbate some problems. If you have underlying imbalances and you're not supporting them, you haven't got the core foundations in place. Like if you've got a thyroid problem, if you're very highly stressed, if your sex hormones are out of balance, then sometimes fasting could make that worse, essentially by driving up the stress hormones in your body. If you are someone who has got a really good foundation in place, if you're eating in a way that supports your blood sugars, supports your thyroid, then it can be a helpful thing to add in to kind of enhance your results. When I use it with my clients, it's something that we tend to bring in months into working with them once we've done the other things that need to be done to properly support their bodies. But as a general rule, I like most people to be having at least a 12-hour overnight fast. There's lots of good research on that, particularly for supporting brain health and helping to kind of prevent cognitive decline. And then some people will do well with extending that fast to more like 14 hours, 18 hours. And, I know some people, not any clients of mine, but I know some people who only have one meal per day, or some people that do alternate day fasting where they eat one day and they don't the next. And, it seems to work well for them. But those have been people who have a very strong foundation in terms of they're eating a really good balanced diet in the first place.
Yeah, and if you're doing that, I mean, the concern I have with that, if someone's alternating every other day, is are they getting enough protein? And even if they're doing not alternating 24 hours, but again, I've had people where they're fasting for 20 hours like every single day, and same thing, it's just a small eating window. So are you getting enough, I mean, nutrients overall, and then on top of that, enough protein?
Mm.
Yeah, so it makes sense what you said. You don't have everybody do intermittent fasting. If anything, usually you're doing things to balance the thyroid, balance the adrenals, lower their stress levels, really incorporating the foundations, maybe having them do like a minimum of like 12 hours, which is reasonable to have most people do that. But
Mm.
if you have people do like 16 or 18-hour fast, you want to make sure they're ready and that their body can handle it. That's what it sounded like you were saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then going back to the exercise. So we're also both on the same page where we don't want people to overtrain. So what type of exercise do you typically recommend for someone who's trying to lose weight?
So I think it's good to do a variety of exercises. All different types of exercise have different benefits. But the thing that I want to make sure people are definitely incorporating is strength training. Going back to that muscle mass, we want to make sure that we are taking steps to at least maintain muscle, if not build muscle, so that we can ensure that we're maintaining our metabolic rate. Because if we're losing muscle, we are reducing our metabolic rate, which is going to, in the long term, lead to, the weight going back on, and, most of that weight going back on being fat tissue. So yeah, strength training is absolutely key. And then, also just gentle exercise as well, walking, swimming, Pilates, yoga, things that, you know, are good for us because they get the blood pumping and they move our bodies in terms of mobility and strength, but they're gentle enough to support your body in relieving stress and lowering those cortisol levels.
Yeah, so variety, it sounds like. Not, I mean, obviously, weight bearing exercise, resistance exercise, important, which I agree. But
Mm.
yeah. So, and speaking of variety, going back to the diet, so we spoke about intermittent fasting, and again, the pros and cons of keto. And so, do you, for most people, then recommend to have a good variety of like plant-based foods as well, like a decent amount of vegetables, or are you more towards like a carnivore type? It sounds like you're not really more carnivore type diet, but like what dietary factors do you incorporate or recommend to your patients?
Yeah, so eating a diet that has a wide variety of different plant-based foods, not necessarily vegetarian or vegan. I think it's fine to include good quality animal protein into your diet, but really making sure that we've got plenty of plant-based foods and a good variety and unprocessed as well. I think that I don't like to tell people to cut anything out, because I think that, we can still eat the foods that we want to eat and be healthy and move towards our health goals. But one thing that I do feel we need to minimize as much as we can is ultra processed foods, because they are so devoid of nutrients. They're so addictive and moreish. And the ingredients that are in them are essentially made in a lab. They're not even really defined as foods. They are, I can't remember what the term that was coined was, but something like food-like substances or something like that. So they're ingredients that are incredibly highly processed. It kind of turns your stomach when you read what they actually do to the foods to turn them into these ingredients. And those are things that our bodies, they're not familiar to our bodies, and so they can be very disruptive to the microbiome, inflammatory, and as I say, they don't actually fill you up, and so you are more likely to overeat with them. So if you're going to limit anything in your diet, I would be looking at replacing those ultra processed foods with whole foods.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And is glyphosate a big problem, or as big of a problem as it is here in the United States? I'm thinking maybe not, but
I don't think it's as big of a problem. It's always difficult to know, because a lot of our stats and facts are come over from American research. But it's something that we're aware of, and we recommend that people eat organic, and particularly organic soy and organic wheat if they are going to have wheat, to avoid things like glyphosate, because it is something that is very concerning.
okay. Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? And if not, I guess the final question would be for those who want to get started, and let's say some things they could do on their own. In a perfect world, they'd be working with someone like yourself. But if someone wants to get started, what are some steps they could take to get on the road to losing weight? And again, if there's anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, feel free to touch upon that as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that, we're obviously talking about a lot of these imbalances that can cause stubborn weight. But, these are not things that are, kind of like a death sentence. They're not things that are going to be something that will stop you from getting to where you want to be. And they're not an excuse either. They're things that we can take steps to address. And it doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It just means that your approach needs to be a little bit different to perhaps what you've been taught in terms of dieting before. So in terms of what you can do to be getting started, I would be just making sure that you're not overcomplicating things, really, because a lot of people jump straight to things like fasting or meal replacements or supplements, but actually it's the simple things that make the biggest difference, not only to your weight management, but to your health, and how easy it is to sustain those changes as well. So like we've been talking about, making sure you're getting enough protein, I think that is the best place to start for most people. And it sounds like a simple thing to do, but it can take a little bit of effort and planning to make sure that you are getting enough protein into all of your meals. So I would start there alongside other simple things like making sure you're drinking enough water, making sure you're getting a variety of different plant-based foods in your diet, making sure you're sleeping enough, taking steps to manage stress and relieve stress. And, doing those things will probably put you ahead of most other people in terms of what people are doing to support their health. And on top of that, I'd add in do some strength training as well.
All right, wonderful. So, Louise, where can people find out more about you?
So if you want to connect with me online, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook by searching at Louise Digby Nutrition. And my website is louisedigbynutrition.com. And on there, you can read about my Metabolism masterclass that I run very regularly. It's a free masterclass where we go a little bit more into my philosophy and what I do with my clients to get results. And then you can also read about my program, which is the Nourish Method, which is what we've kind of been talking about in terms of when I do testing and put together a personalized action plan for each person to get them to their goals.
And then also you have your own podcast, The Thriving Metabolism.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So if you search for the Thriving Metabolism on any podcast platform or YouTube, then you will find that there. And we really delve into the subjects that we've been talking about today.
All right, that is awesome. I will make sure to include those links in the show notes. And thank you so much. This was really a great conversation. And I'm sure the listeners learned a lot, and I learned a few things as well.
Thank you. It's been great.